Welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday, a lectionary podcast from St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut, normally done by the clergy of St. Mark's, but this time one of the clergy and our digital missioner, Rob Schwartz, who's normally behind the camera. So great to have you with us today, Rob.
Finally got me on this end of things.
Such an easy passage for you to join us on. Today, Jesus is calling his foremost disciple, Satan, and talking about the cost of discipleship, perhaps leading us to wonder why anyone would follow Jesus. So let's hear what today's passage has for us. This is the 14th Sunday after Pentecost, and the passage is Matthew chapter 16, verses 21 through 28. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Then Jesus told his disciples, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Okay, so Rob, do you want to kick us off? What's going on here? Where are we in the story? And why would Peter and then Jesus be talking in this way?
Well, you know what I love about this part, especially in contrast to the last episode where, it's who do people say the Son of Man is, right? That's kind of where we left things.
That's right, yeah.
And Peter's got it. He's the one who kind of has the answers there. And Jesus says, well, you're the rock on which I'll build my church. Yeah. And so we go from one passage where Peter's, kind of riding high. He's the rock, and now he's the stumbling block.
Well said, yeah.
But it kind of makes me think of, what is it, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think so.
It's,
no.
If you take like a graph or whatever, and it basically shows how much knowledge you have of something and how much confidence you have in it. It's like sometimes when people get a little bit of knowledge, they're like, oh, I know just about all there is to it, and the graph kind of shoots up. And then all of a sudden something goes, oh, wait, I don't actually know that much, and the graph suddenly drops straight back down, and over time it slowly kind of makes its way back up as they're learning.
Fascinating.
And so I kind of, when I read this, that's what I see with Peter. He's like, oh, I've got this. And then Jesus is like, well, do you really get what it means for me to be the Messiah?
Right.
So...
Yeah, of course, what Peter seems to have in mind is a much more conventional idea of a Messiah, as was thought of by people of his culture and time, that the Messiah would be sort of a warrior king who would kick out the bad guys who were keeping God's people from, living the free and happy, prosperous lives that they should. And therefore, the Messiah, would not suffer and die at the hands of his enemies. But Jesus is saying this is exactly what's going to happen.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things just before we hopped on here that I was saying is, we've got this language of when we start to talk about Jesus talking about all the things that are going to happen to him, in between his kind of predictions of what the Messiah has to endure, and then his response to Peter kind of pushing back on that. We get this kind of mirroring or this parallel story that kind of goes back to Jesus' temptation in the wilderness with the devil. He's tempted to save his life by making food out of stones, lose his life by jumping off the highest point, or he's tempted to kind of if he'd give up, if he'll just follow the devil, he could have all the kingdoms of the world. And so, that's early on, he's saying, those are the things I'm pushing away because there's something bigger. Yeah. It's not about me.
Indeed.
And
that's good.
And so, when Peter's coming in and saying, well, you can't do those things, you can't be killed and tortured and all of that. He's saying, well, it's not about me.
Yeah.
There's something bigger at play here.
That's very profound, especially because it connects so beautifully to the second part where he's talking about the cost of discipleship. But before we move on to that, Jesus is being tempted in this passage. We don't typically talk about it that way. The scriptures don't make that explicit. The language of the language of temptation is not used in this passage. But because, as you said so rightly, that it echoes, and certainly deliberately so, Jesus' temptation by the devil in the wilderness before he begins his ministry. He says there, get away, Satan. He says here to Peter, get behind me, Satan. That this is a sort of temptation that Jesus, maybe, we might imagine, actually had a real opportunity to become the sort of Messiah that people like Peter hoped he would be. I mean, he's incredibly charismatic. He's powerful. He has a reputation as a healer. He's clearly a very strong leader. He's gathering a movement. And if he just maybe played along a little bit with the game and the worldview of those in power in his Jewish context, perhaps the groundswell of his movement would have propelled him to some political prominence, and he would have had the backing of the leaders and so on. We don't know. I mean, obviously that's not what happened, but we do know that there were so many armed insurrections in the time of Jesus, 100 years before, 100 years after, that Jews like Jesus were taking up arms to try to reclaim sovereignty, independence from the Romans. Maybe Jesus could have been that kind of leader. And that's tempting, right? I mean, glory, fortune and glory, as I don't know why that phrase is in my head from Indiana Jones in the last, in the Temple of Doom, but there it is. This is a real temptation. Perhaps Jesus, we don't know if Jesus actually felt a pull in that direction, but nonetheless, when people are looking at you, when people, at least some number of people, will do anything you say, follow you wherever you go, that if there are a few things in life that are more tempting than that, I think it's very significant that Jesus, precisely at the point where people are saying, you are the Son of God, you are the Messiah, he's like, well, I have to be killed. Not only do I think I'm going to get killed, but I have to be killed. There's this language of necessity here. Yeah. The Son of Man must suffer and be killed, meaning that this is what he understands God's will for him to be in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's, he's going from like up here, and he's saying, oh, but all that has to fall away.
Yeah, it's astonishing. A man of principle and conviction, to be sure, which to me is just so awesome and inspiring.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things, you touched on it before when you were talking about Jesus' response to the devil in the wilderness, and Jesus' response to Peter here, and it sounds, at face value, we might kind of hear the same thing. But you made the point that he says to the devil, get away, or go away from me. Yeah. He says to Peter, get behind me. He doesn't say, like, forget you, man. Yeah. And so by saying get behind me, that's a follower, right? Yeah. He's saying, like, and then he gets into, what is it? What does it really mean to follow me? Yeah. And so when I kind of really looked at that difference, I was like, oh, okay. Because all of a sudden I'm like, wait, you just like held Peter up here, and now you're just saying, get out of my way. Yeah. But he's really saying, what is it, you have to be a follower. What does it mean to follow me? Yeah. And one of the cool things, I was flipping through James
Oh, wow, that's what that book is, yeah.
And the Lynching Tree, fantastic book.
That's a classic.
If anyone wants to read it sometime. But I was, thinking about, it's not easy for the disciples. They have these moments where sometimes they seem to get what's going on, and other times they're still like, oh, but why do you have to do these things, Jesus? Yeah. So many times, right? I have to go through this place. Why do you have to go through there? And here he's saying he has to go to Jerusalem knowing what's going to happen, and it's kind of like, why? Why do you have to go there? And so I was skimming through this because there's a chapter on bearing the cross and all this, and there was this great excerpt here that he had about Martin Luther King, and if I could just read a quick little thing, because I thought it was a really cool parallel. In the spring of 1968, Martin Luther King went to the city of Memphis to help resolve a bitter labor dispute with racial overtones. He did not go to Memphis to die, but in the hope he could help change people's minds there. As we all know, he was assassinated in the course of his visit, and many people look at his death as martyrdom. Though he had not gone there to die, and though his mind may have been preoccupied with hopes for the future, rather than with the prospect of death, he had known very well for a long time that death was a constant possibility, so long as he continued to speak and work for his cause. In the case of Jesus, something similar must have been true.
Wow.
So I think that's kind of, to me, that's where Jesus is at. It's not even so much going there saying, like, yes, he's going there knowing that it's going to lead to his death. And obviously there's, fulfillment of prophecies and things like that we draw. But I think it's really like, this is the work, like this is what it meant to do that work. And he knew, I'm going to rub certain people the wrong way. I'm going to make enemies, but this is the possibility if I follow this path.
Yeah.
And so he still carried on that path.
Right on. I think that's totally right, Rob, at least as far as I'm concerned. The way I look at it is in a sense, the cross was God's will for Jesus, but that is because, God and God's infinite knowledge and wisdom knows that when somebody like Jesus lives and loves and challenges injustice like he did, he knows how people in power, God knows how people in power will react to that.
Right.
And that's how it ends. So it's a sort of a densely woven web of how God's will relates to the cross, but I think that it's not as if God sent Jesus to the cross in a vacuum, right? It's because of the context.
Just check these boxes, Jesus,
yeah,
okay?
It's because of the context. It's because of the people, not just Jesus's people. I mean, if Jesus was of any other race or tradition, I think basically the same thing would have happened. It's not particular to Jews or even Romans.
Right.
It's particular to human beings, human nature. That people in power are threatened when the way that they do things, which profits them and comes at the expense of others, is challenged. And naturally, they don't want that changed.
Yeah, I mean, look at Jesus. Ever since he was a baby, right? He's seen as a threat by Herod, and all of a sudden babies are being killed because got to get rid of the threat.
That's right. It's an astonishing thing that somebody who never would have taken up a weapon, right?
Exactly.
Is so threatening to people who have all the weapons.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do we want to pop on to this next section here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said something that I like I said a few minutes ago, I think illuminates so much of this passage that follows on the cross and self-denial, that for Jesus, it was not about him. He's thinking it's not about me. And now he's telling his followers, for you to follow me, it can't be about you. Mm-hmm. This is not a quick ride to the top. I'm not offering, in the jargon of today, self-help hacks. I'm not giving you, health optimization. I'm not going to tell you how to win friends and influence people, or whatever it is that people follow people for in today's world, which is not in some ways all that different than what people followed people in that world were looking for. That this is a much, much, much different path. It's a stranger path. It looks like it leads to defeat. It looks like it costs you everything and gives you nothing back, but actually it's the way to life, the only life that truly matters, the only life that truly endures. So this is, in a lot of ways, of a piece with perennial spiritual wisdom. I mean, the Buddhists talk about, if you want to be happy, let go of everything.
Yeah.
People usually seek happiness by trying to grab onto stuff. But how can we make sense of this? Because even though this is perennial wisdom embedded in the great traditions of the world, it still is not everyday wisdom. It is still not common sense for people in today's world. So how do you think about this?
And for me, this part of the reading is like the meat of it for me. I mean, there's all 3 sections of this really have some good stuff that you can read into. But I love, what are the 2 things he says? He says, if you want to become my follower, so now he's right, he said, get behind me, follow me.
Yeah.
If you want to become my follower, you have to deny yourself and you have to take up your cross. And I think those are things that are tough for us in today's day and age, because we're constantly thinking about ourselves and things like that. And I think I even preached on saying this once, but I usually tell people, if you want a comfortable religion, don't be a Christian. If you really want to follow Christ, it's not that comfortable.
So true. Yeah.
I was listening to someone the other day, and he said, when I see things wrong in the world, I feel like I have to do something about it. You always hear these news stories of something horrible happened, and all these people were just standing by and let it happen. And people said, well, yeah, but if you help, you're going to make enemies. You put a target on your own back.
Right.
And I think, Jesus is saying, again, don't think of you it's
Mm-hmm.
you got to let that part go.
Yeah.
And taking up a cross. Now we think of people wearing crosses around their necks, or they're hanging in their cars, and I think it's lost a little bit of what the cross was. It was an ancient device of public torture.
Yeah.
And so, our crosses that we bear, I don't think are, it's really stressful with the kids, and I got to bear that cross. Oh, my job is just so overwhelming. Got to bear that cross.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are daily stresses, but I think the denying yourself. Peter always jokes, Father Peter always jokes, not this Peter in the Bible, but Father Peter always jokes about, I wear these different T-shirts all the time that usually have some kind of a message. So I thought of, what do I wear today?
Okay.
And for those who are listening to the audio version, you can't see it, but and the full thing's really on the back. So even if you're watching YouTube right now, you don't see the whole thing, but it says "Speak Out" on the front, and on the back, it has all these different examples of, there was this story about gun violence that I heard, but it wasn't in my neighborhood, so I didn't speak out for it. The LGBTQ community was, faced challenges on this, but it didn't affect my own marital status, so I didn't speak out. And it goes on and on of all these different groups who face oppression. And then at the very end it says, and then they came for me, and there was no one to speak out for me. Mm-hmm. And so I think that to me just spoke of this kind of self-denial.
Yeah.
We have to give up what's best, just thinking about ourselves and what is it for everyone else.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's beautiful. I think it connects really well to this language of denying oneself. Elsewhere in the gospel, it's used in a way that suggests it means like disowning oneself. Jesus talks about how if people essentially live in a way that's counter to what he's calling people to throughout the gospel narratives, on the day of judgment, which is something we've obviously talked about on other podcasts, and I'm sure will again, but maybe we won't totally unpack that today. But in Matthew, there's this idea of a judgment day that runs throughout. That Jesus will deny certain people before his Father. Now, whatever it means, that has something to do with disowning. Temporary, permanent, conversation for another time.
Right.
But that language shows up again here. And Jesus is telling his people that to follow him means to disown oneself as the center of one's existence. You cannot live for yourself, that you are to live for God, for Jesus, and perhaps even equally, we might say, as long as we sort of have God in the flow chart first, but that what it is to truly live for God is to live for God's creation, to live, and at least as much as anything, if not more, for God's people, not just people who already believe and follow God and are part of our religion or whatever, but human beings, right, made in the image of God. I mean, I would say that creation in some ways is made in the image of God, but again, maybe a conversation for another time. But that to really follow Jesus is to learn how to see as God sees, to will what God's wills, and what God wills is for the good of everybody. Now, when we're just narrowly focused on our own good, there's no way we can see clearly. It distorts our vision. It gives us these blinders. And so when we're only seeking our own good, we can't actually achieve it, right? We might think we will by, piling up money and possessions and status, and even taking care of our own family or our own tribe. But when that comes at the expense of certainly challenging injustice or speaking out for people who are suffering, but even when it comes at the expense of our connectedness to other people, our connectedness to the world, we're not happy, right? It might look like everything is clean and shiny and attractive on the outside, but at the very least, there's an inner emptiness. And a lot of people are very confused when they have everything, or they seem to have everything, and yet they feel like, is this it? Now, that's the best version of it. It gets a lot worse.
Right.
But if you really want to come alive on the inside, and this word that Jesus is using here for life is psyche in Greek, and it can also be translated soul. So Jesus is not just talking about, like physical, biological life. He's talking about inner, spiritual life, sort of the spark that without which our physical life isn't really worth much. So Jesus is showing us how to really come alive. It's counterintuitive, but to seek our own good, we have to first seek the good of all.
Yeah. Well, and it's this language of dying to something.
Indeed.
Those who seek it, you find life in Jesus, die to yourself or die to these other things. And Nadia Bowles-Weber had this, who's a great, pastor and author that I love to listen to, and her book Pastrix, she says, like, it's so infuriating to hear Jesus say, like, I have to die to this and do this and all these tough things to follow. And she
goes,
really
tough.
And even though I kind of resist that, when I do, I find that I gained more life, more freedom, and all these things than I would have if I had kept resisting that, following this path, following God in the first place. And
absolutely.
And so that really spoke to me.
Yeah. I think that's a great note to end on.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're free to stop listening to this podcast now, and we hope that it has brought you some life. Thank you, Rob, for sitting in. You're going to be sitting in more now.
Yeah, you're going to be stuck with me for a little bit. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I really look forward to it.
Thank you. Yeah, me too. This is fun.
Yeah. Until next time, have a great week.